Should you, yes you, create a personal brand? And the fact that this video isn't 10 seconds long probably tells you the answer isn't a flat out no. However, there are definitely some important things to consider, so we're going to delve into all of that right now, right here in this video, so you know whether you should start building your own personal brand. Now, we should probably start by acknowledging the fact that you already have a brand. Everyone does. Because there's a famous quote in marketing that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. That applies to companies, but it applies to individuals as well. Your personal brand is really just what people think about you, what people say about you, how people feel about you, and all of the associations. It's all bundled together, and that is your brand essentially. But of course, at the moment, I'm guessing the only people who really know about your personal brand are your friends, family, and colleagues, anyone who already knows you. What we're really talking about here in this video, and what people normally mean when they say about building a brand, is actually looking to monetize that brand and build a presence, especially online, that is going to appeal to a wider audience and attract new people who've never met you before, but who are going to be invested in your brand. Now, why the hell would you want to do that? Well, there are quite a few reasons, but one of the main ones to me is that it allows you to decommoditize yourself. And what I mean by that is that because of the internet now, so many people are putting forward their services and saying to the world, this is what I can do, this is what I can offer. And so you need a way to stand out from the crowd, and a personal brand is what allows you to do that. And one of the best examples of this is if you look at a website like Upwork or any kind of freelancer website, where you can go to these sites and you type in what kind of skill or service you're looking for. Let's say maybe you want to hire a web designer. Well, when you go to one of these sites where it's like a marketplace, it's very undifferentiated. There are no real personal brands, and so you're just kind of searching through a long list of usernames of people saying, yep, I can do that, I can do that. Contrast that though with if there was someone who'd built a personal brand as a web designer, and they were regularly putting out content on social media, providing useful tips and information about building a website, and they were making fun content and people were following them, and you saw their posts a lot, you kind of got to know a little bit about them, and you saw them as an expert. Who would you rather work with, them or one of those random names on a list on a generic marketplace where there's thousands of options to choose from? It's obviously going to be the person with the personal brand that you would like to work with the most, and that means they can command higher prices. So that's just a very basic example, but it applies in pretty much any niche or industry, that having a personal brand allows you to stand out much more, which can then bring you better clients, higher prices, and get you better results. But let's look at another example. Let's talk about speakers, because there are countless events and conferences around the world that continually need speakers to come and speak on stage at their events. But how do they decide who to hire? Well, obviously, again, it comes down to personal branding, right? Because in terms of the audience's perspective, they would much rather come and see someone who they've heard of before and already know about. They're going to be much more excited about that. And so obviously that's going to help fill the event. So the person running the conference or the event is going to want to hire the person with a personal brand who's got the authority on this subject. But then for the actual speaker, that means the one with the personal brand is going to be able to command much higher prices, because they're going to be able to sell out venues better. So, it's the equivalent of someone you've never heard of versus Gary Vaynerchuk speaking on stage. Obviously, Gary is going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars probably for his appearance versus someone who no one's ever heard of, even if they're a complete expert on digital marketing and social media, and they'd be saying word for word what Gary's saying. Obviously, Gary can command such higher prices and get way more attention and excitement around it, all because of his personal brand. People already know him, people already trust him, he's already positioned as the expert. And so in many ways, a personal brand is just like a brand for a company. If we take the smartphone market, for example, obviously Apple have one of the strongest brands in the world, if not the strongest. And so if a brand new competitor comes along, launches a phone just like the new iPhone, that on paper, the specifications are just the same, it looks amazing, you can't really see any difference between them, Apple are still going to be able to charge much higher prices and get way more sales. And that's largely due to the branding, because people aren't just buying based on logic and facts, they're tied to emotionally to that specific brand and what it represents. And so those kind of results are what you can achieve if you build your personal brand correctly. So after hearing that, it probably won't come as a shock to you that I believe most people watching this would benefit from having a personal brand, because you've got to remember, a personal brand is always going to be with you. It can be helpful in a lot of ways you wouldn't even think. It doesn't just have to be for people who are trying to sell a product or service. I found from YouTube in particular, once I started kind of putting content out there to the world, it opened a lot of surprising opportunities I'd have never even have thought of, or, you know, I've spoken with people that I wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to. So there are definitely a lot of doors it can open. And as I said, for people who are watching videos like this and channels like this, who are probably a little bit entrepreneurial, probably very driven people, I think there are a lot of advantages of starting to build your personal brand sooner rather than later. Now, my first ever little small taste of the benefits of a personal brand came when I was applying for a placement job, which is where you go and work in industry for a year as part of your university degree. But the places are very competitive, and so it's normally quite a tough application process. But I remember I submitted my application, and very quickly I had a call back to say, oh, the manager would like to fast track you and you can come in for a one-to-one interview with them. Would that work for you? And I was like, yeah, obviously, that's great. And then they went on to explain that the reason for that was that on my CV, I had a link to my own personal website, and the recruitment person had gone on and looked at it, was impressed. They'd forwarded it on to the manager, who'd also looked and was really impressed and said, this guy, we want to get him in. And so it all came about just because I had a website. Obviously, probably no applications they've ever had from 20-year-olds had their own personal website, and it was quite a professional looking website as well that kind of talked about some of my skills, my background, all of that stuff. It was nothing too elaborate, but just that simple thing, it made me stand out from the crowd. It was a way of branding myself, and it clearly paid off because I then went in and got the job. And so that was just a little taster of just how having a personal brand, even on a small scale, could lead to these extra opportunities. In fact, just to add to that point even further, I remember I was able to negotiate a raise in that job, even though it was my first ever corporate job. And I think it was pretty much all down to the fact that I'd branded myself a certain way and had this kind of personal brand that most other people didn't, so I was able to negotiate a higher wage. But before you rush out and start building your personal brand, making your own website, posting content on all the different social media, it's probably worth bearing a couple of things in mind. And the first consideration is whether you feel comfortable actually putting things out there to the world like that, because obviously pretty much anyone could in theory see them. And so I know for a lot of people that might be a scary thought, and if it really scares you that much, maybe that isn't the best route for you to go. All I would say though is that you're not really going to be sharing anything that crazy or controversial, and at the end of the day you will always be in control of what gets posted, and you can always pull things down if circumstances change. But it is something to consider. Do you feel comfortable with it? If you kind of on the fence, I would say then you maybe just need to test the waters a little bit, because once you get started you'll probably find that it doesn't actually bother you that much. And I suppose the other consideration you should maybe have is, are you going to be doing anything that's going to negatively impact that personal brand? Because once you put yourself out there a little bit and you've kind of building this public profile, so to speak, well, just because the good things you do reflect very well on you, any bad things you do, any really controversial things you say will reflect badly on your brand. So you have to kind of bear that in mind a little bit and be a little bit more careful about what you say, how you act, and so on. But I think most of the time that's probably not going to be an issue. So if you are still interested at this point in the idea of creating your own personal brand, or maybe you have already started and you're just kind of wanting to know how you can develop it further, well, then there are a couple of videos here which I think are going to really help. But most importantly, there are some more videos coming to this very channel in the near future that are going to go more in depth with an actual strategy for building a personal brand that I have seen be very, very successful for a lot of people, and the sort of things that I'm going to be implementing myself. So hit the bell icon and make sure you're subscribed if you want to see them, and I'll hopefully see you very soon. Cheers.